So time is a great generic way to do that. Any facilitator can impose time deadlines on a brainstorming session in a way that's really going to help the lowest common denominator to like level up their creativity. But if you're dealing with, experts or professional artists who have spent years working on a certain problem, giving them more constraints is actually it's too confining. So there is sort of this curvilinear or inverted U-shape relationship between constraint and creativity, and somewhere in the middle is right. But you have to remember that people bring their own constraints to the table, and the more experienced you are with your given art form, the less you really need those time constraints. And that's why you see, that's why it's irritating when you have if you're in, say, an agency setting, and you're an artist, having someone put deadlines on your work, it can be irritating. When it's really useful is when you really don't want to do the work, right? I mean, everyone has that experience. I can only get stuff done under deadline. That's because you don't really want to do it. But then you discover that given the deadline, you can find enjoyment, you can find flow because you're forced to just get started. And getting started is what it's all about.
Yeah, I used to remember when I was a kid just hating to cut the grass or do any chore. But once I got started with it, it really wasn't bad. It was the dread and the anxiety before it, and that carried through all of my career. I had a paper out when I was a kid, and often again, I thought, I just don't want to have to go do it today. But once I got on my bike and headed out, it's like, I love this. And I remember that still when I go into a project, I just don't feel like, but once started, it's like, yeah, what a great pleasure to do this. So.
Right. When I was in high school, if I had a term paper due, I would start writing it at about 3 a.m, the morning it was due. And it drove my dad crazy. And he kept explaining, if you do it ahead of time, it won't be as stressful. I'm like, but then I won't do it. Or worse, what happens to me sometimes is I overcomplicate it because I'm given too much time and it goes in too many directions. I hadn't really figured out that.
Oh my word, yeah.
That thing of like constraining the task appropriately yet. And so it would become this sprawling, multi-chapter piece, which happened to me with my dissertation actually also. I think that I'm a big fan, as a teacher, and I still do teach. I teach at the design school at Stanford. I think you're doing your students a huge favor and yourself a huge favor if you can structure a creative project with enough kind of milestones or mini deadlines in the middle that people are given many opportunities to have the accountability of a deadline, as well as, every deadline is an opportunity to get into that flow state of like really enjoying your work and being present in what you're doing. And so you want to give people as many opportunities as you can in the course of a creative project to get into that state and decide, I think I'll spend another half hour. I thought I only needed 2 hours to do this, but I'm really having a good time. I want to keep going. Every chance you can give people to enjoy their creative work is a good thing. So I like structuring stuff, like kind of hyper structuring it so that there's a lot of mini deadlines along the way.
Well, you're touching on something I want to go a little deeper on, but in the interest of disclosure, I want to back up and say that we were introduced actually by a wonderful guest I was talking with a couple of weeks ago, Mark Barden, who co-authored A Beautiful Constraint. In our conversation, we touched on the subject of the right blend of constraints to freedom. I often think about it, I call it the Goldilocks concern, where one's too hot, one's too cold, but one's just right. With constraints, it seems kind of the same thing. How do you know when you're just right? It's not too much freedom, but too little freedom. How do you advise, or what is your experience on, what's just right?
Yeah, it's a great book that he just came out with, and I really recommend. Are you going to put it in the show notes? I recommend.
Yes,
I definitely recommend that to your readers. And that's how I met Mark, was talking to him about his book. While he was writing it, we were working together on some ideas, and he mentions my research in the beginning of the book, but it's fantastic. That question comes up all the time. There's no magic bullet answer, of course, because we're human. But
of course,
I would say that the best rule of thumb I have is, do you know what problem you're solving? Does that problem eliminate certain courses of action, certain courses of inquiry, certain courses of brainstorming? If it doesn't narrow the field of opportunities without you having to think or analyze, it's not constrained enough.
Oh, that's a good point.
And I would say, like, you need to be able to honor that constraint as if it is an iron stake in the ground. And I really do think of it like it's a pivot point. So, in startups, which is where I spend most of my time, we talk about the pivot. And the pivot is when you decide to change your business model or your product or your value proposition or your audience. You shift what you're doing in order to try to find traction, which is the beginning of a long road to success for a startup. The only way that you will have a pivot point is if you really are dedicated to that pivot that's in the ground. And I like from all of my experience and all of my research, it seems to be that when the pivot point is a problem to solve, you're a lot better off than if it's a solution to make.
Oh, that's a great point.
You cannot be a slave to the solution. Then all you're doing is you are using all of your cognitive and emotional resources to bolster what could be a really bad idea.
Well, that's a great point.
But if you are trying to solve a problem, then you're open to data. You're open to learning and new information. And as you have people start using your idea, whatever it is, you can make tweaks to make it work better to solve that problem. If you're just trying to force a solution down people's throat, you're going to spend a whole lot of money on marketing and you'll never take off.
I'm not sure if this overlaps in your mind or not, but as you're talking about that, it makes me think back to Simon Sinek's Start With Why. Mm-hmm. Kind of as a pivot point, knowing what that question is or where you're working from. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's the most important question. That's the most important question. And, I work with startups on growth, and they often want to, they just want to grow. They just want to grow their user base.
Of course.
They want to see those metrics go, up into the, they want the rocket ship story. And there is no way to do that except for finding out how to deliver value. And if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, you will never create value. You're just trying to give yourself a paycheck.
Yeah, and for a lot of startups, I'm sure that's a huge incentive early on, is especially from spouses and those around, is when you're going to have something to show for this. Mm-hmm. So the pressure's great.
Oh, it's a crucible.
I want to jump back on that point and make it a little more personal. You've had some experience in disappointing starts and some missed opportunities in the same way a lot of successful people have. What are some of the lessons that you can share about struggling to get traction when it comes time to bringing your talents and insight to the market?
It's very, very difficult to ever say why a startup succeeds or fails. It's like saying why a leader is good or not good. It's like there are so many stars that need to align for a company to succeed and thrive. And so, I say this I think everyone should take this with a huge grain of salt, and please prove me wrong. But it seems to be that those companies that attempt to build their way into success, meaning they are engineering new features, they are continuing to develop a product. And I work with technology products, and so it's very engineering driven. They tend to burn up their runway, their remaining resources and capital and time on development. And often, through no fault of their own, the development is poorly conceived. It doesn't, whatever they're building, whatever the features or software are, has no audience that cares enough to stop what they're already doing and try something new, meaning their product. I really believe in the lean startup approach, or, whether you read Eric Ries or Steve Blank or Ash Maurya, any of those guys that's writing about this, I really believe that you can test out an idea on paper and pen and get reactions and try to understand what people's pain points are, and then design solutions to meet those pain points. And you'll be much better off than spending a ton of money and time building a prototype that no one wants. I mean, that's the worst thing that can happen. And so often, development and building is a really safe place for those who are engineering driven. It feels like you're making progress. It's that busyness that we talked about. And I really almost always try to just tell my founders to stop building.
Right.
And it's, I don't think I've figured out the right way to give that advice because they don't, you know. But at the very least, I hope to slow them down because I can see that they have no, they haven't yet figured out what problem they're trying to solve for people. They know what problem they're trying to solve for themselves or maybe for the world. I work with mission-driven startups. So there's often like a really strong mission of this is the problem. If everybody adopts our product, we're going to solve the world in this huge way. Guess what? It's a single player game. You need to solve a problem for one single person using your product alone. If you solve it for that person, other people will also have that value. And then you can start thinking about what will happen if everybody starts using the product together and how you'll change the world. But if no one person wants to use it, you'll never be able to do it.
That's great counsel. And I guess parallel to that, and you may have already hit this pretty hard, but you've worked with companies in which their business model was flawed, but no one wanted to make the disruptive decisions to change it, even if it meant the company might fail. What has that taught you that others might benefit from?
That one is still a puzzle to me. And, I have a PhD in business. I spent a lot of time at a business school where business models and revenue matter a great deal. I certainly consider my home to be the venture-backed world where there are multiple kind of bottom lines at stake. Sometimes it makes more sense as a venture-backed startup or as one that wants to be one to not waste a ton of money, but spend a lot of money in order to demonstrate traction or hit some metrics so that you can get your next round of funding, so that you can, grow, so that you can stay alive and then be able to be a sustainable business. It's not imperative that you are profitable or even have revenue for sometimes years. I'm not a huge fan, though, of designing without any sense of what your business model will be. Yes, it's true. If you have users, like you have something of value. But I think that what happens sometimes is that say that you're Facebook, or you're another what I call like an eyeball product. So your value as a business is determined by the number of people interacting with your product and their level of engagement. That means most likely, like the best business model is going to be something around advertising because that's what eyeballs are good for. And that may or may not be what you actually want to do with your life, is provide another venue for advertising display. And so as a founder, you should think about that. You should think like, what value do I want to deliver to the world? What value do I want to provide to my individual users? And how can I make my user my customer? Like that, those are my favorite kinds of businesses because there's just a real purity. If the money is coming from the same person who's engaging with your product and actually giving you value, then you're not as much in a position of conflict of interest. So, for me, I use Facebook mostly nowadays as a phone book. It's my directory for finding people. But, sometimes I'm in a couple of Facebook groups. That's useful. But I don't like Facebook as a company. I love it as an advertising platform. It's great for testing. I use it a ton for like kind of like my diagnostic strategic work. But like it's not a place that I anymore feel like is personal because it really is about advertising to me. So I feel like it's the value proposition that it set out to achieve of connecting people. It came in to conflict with their business model once they figured out what their business model was. So as a user-led designer, kind of first and foremost as my approach to the world, D-school all the way, I think that you need to design a business model that matches the value that you want to deliver. So I'm confused about this business model question because I know that a lot of very smart people say, get users and the money will follow. I guess I just care a lot more about where the money comes from. Like I do not want to make people feel that they want to buy more stuff that